Will the military build and pay for the wall on the southern border? We'll talk about it on the program through an interview. Stranger danger is taught in public schools, but is it effective to ward off a potential abductor? And genetic testing, a big industry, especially with 23andMe. How popular is it, though, with regard to your privacy? Hello there, Terry here on Think America, where we reason first and then converse. Welcome again to Think America, America's radio town hall. Every week I bring in real Americans to chew on thought-provoking conversation starters on all things Americana and beyond, items and subject matter you won't necessarily see in your newspapers or on television. This week, we have from the West Coast, Susan joins us. She's an executive with the gaming and casino industry. Megan Porth will be along later on the program. She joins us, and my interview on the building of the wall, where we're at amid the shutdown. Susan, welcome to the program. Nice to have you.
It's really great to be here.
The big brain drain. What does that mean? Well, as the world is becoming more interconnected and more global, and as migration continues with seemingly no stopping that, intellectuals traditionally move to where they're most comfortable to live and work. This is no different than in the United States either. It's true with third world countries. People will migrate to greener pastures if they think those pastures will indeed in the future be greener for them. It could happen in the United States, as I just said. Is it happening now? That means to say, are the intellectuals fleeing to other areas of the world because they're either fed up or they're not artistically producing anything? They can't be creative, that means. They can't innovate. They can't work their craft. They find no new business. They're squashed politically. Academically, emotionally, and all the rest. Intellectually, they're not stimulated and all the rest. So what is just your initial knee-jerk reaction to this, just in general, before we get into specifics, Susan, on whether or not we're going to, in America, experience a brain drain?
From what I read right now, it is not an issue. The issue is really more regional for the United States, in that people from rural areas are going to the city. The Rust Belt is experiencing a brain drain, and also to go to the city for more lucrative and better benefits than in those regions. So I really don't think there's a brain drain occurring now. It doesn't mean it can't occur. We're also interconnected, and it's so easy to get from one place to another. But I think something that is a problem is that we're seeing less and less of Americans who want to be trained getting jobs in the United States. And I'll start with the idea of doctors. Right now, the doctors in our country are, half of them are turned down for medical school, even though they have high GPAs. And more than 80%, though, of H-1B visa holders are getting into the United States and becoming doctors and working as technicians in the technical field. So I think that there is a concern that our own populace won't have the same opportunities as the populace from other countries, simply because corporations, after they pay their fees, their visa fees, pay them less to do the job.
Well, that is the case, isn't it? So with more migrants coming into the U.S., whether they want to be a doctor or anything else, you've got this more competition for our own. You've got a disbursement. It reminds me with the women's movement in the early 70s, late 60s, as women started to elbow their way into big-time jobs, there needed to be enough room for everybody. And in some cases, there just wasn't, depending upon the field. Our GDP growth, as you undoubtedly know, and most of the listening audience would know, means manpower workers the manpower or the worker has to grow, or we don't get GDP growth, as well as productivity has to grow. And when there's more manpower, but they don't produce as much, we don't see as good the effect with GDP, or vice versa. Getting back to where it works in second and third world countries, for example, I was reading, Susan, where in Turkey, the wealthy are leaving because of political reasons, with Erdogan, who seems to be more of a hardliner. In secular Turkey, he's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be very secular, international city as Istanbul and so forth. But the intellectuals are leaving Istanbul because of the hardliner. In Venezuela, we know for political reasons under Hugo Chavez, the intellectuals left there. We've seen it in Europe. Einstein came here in the 30s and put his brain power into the United States. So it does happen. I'm concerned, like you are, with more migrants coming in. Because America is supposed to be this beacon of light. So everybody still wants to come here. I don't see the brain drain yet, but I see the potential as more migrants start to come in. And this is the fear, because more migrants that don't have the education that our intellectuals do have, they can't keep up. It would take them a lifetime to get there, or their children to get there, or grandchildren to get there. But in the meantime, there would be this disbursement.
Yeah, I think that's part of the immigration conflict we're having right now between the left and the right. Exactly what the immigrants are contributing to our society, or at the top level, are a lot of immigrants being hired over Americans simply because it's a way for U.S. corporations to import workers and keep buwages down.
Oh, exactly.
They need to fill their labor at the lowest cost possible.
I like what you said earlier, and I think we need to drive this point home, that the brain drain that we're seeing, quote unquote, this is air quotes now, folks, quote unquote, at least within the confines of the United States, is happening more to the East and West Coast, if there is a brain drain, where there is more brains. New York, the DC, metropolitan DC area, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Seattle, for example, or to big cities, but mostly on the East and West Coast. And I'm reminded of an example with regard to Amazon recently. Think through how many, I think there were 21 cities that literally bent over backwards for Amazon to come to them, so that they could keep their intellectual brainiacs in middle America, instead of those brainiacs chasing the Amazon job to a second satellite, or a second headquarters, wherever that may be. And what did Amazon do? Amazon goes and plops in New York, Long Island, and in Northern Virginia. And they, of course, argue business is business. We don't need to be in Nebraska. We don't need to be in Phoenix, Arizona. We don't need to be in Great Falls, Montana, Salina, Kansas. We don't need to be in Rapid City, South Dakota. There were cities, Denver, Dallas, they were begging for Amazon satellite headquarters to come, their first headquarters out of Seattle. Please come, please come. We can build up our communities, etc. We've got enough brains here, and we've got enough workers here. And what do? They go to the East Coast, particularly New York and DC.
Yeah, it kind of made me feel it was all a ruse or a sham to even pretend that they were looking at Middle America for their source of workers. It sounded good, looked good, publicity-wise, read well, but where they ended up was where there was already a high concentration of trained workers.
Yes, and indeed, and they argue this. They say, listen, the manpower is already there, the intellectual prowess is already there, the airports are already there, it's our destination for Europe. You can get to Miami quickly and get goods down to South America. It's already there. Schools are already there, hospitals are already there, and meanwhile, everybody in Middle America is waving their hands and saying, we're just the flyover states once again, aren't we?
And also with Amazon, the area that it chose to put their most recent plant in is also an area that aligns with Jeff Bezos' cultural and political orientation.
That's true. That's a very astute point. Absolutely true. And just a little footnote on Jeff Bezos, in case the listening audience doesn't know. I find this kind of ironic. He's the richest man in the world, and soon his wife will be the ex-wife, as soon as the divorce goes through, will be the richest woman in the world, tripling, quadrupling what the Queen of England owns, tripling, quadrupling what Oprah owns. Mrs. Mackenzie Bezos, she's not a ex yet, with this divorce, will be in the billions and billions of dollars as a result of her marriage to Jeff Bezos. So isn't that kind of fun?
I guess that is kind of funny. And it also kind of addresses the issue of them being monopolistic. Single-handedly, now she has broken up the monopoly.
Yeah, she has. And people don't even know her very much, but she is now going to be known quite a bit, because I think it's something like she's going to have, I don't know, $60 billion or something just by being the wife of Jeff Bezos, soon to be the ex-wife. So the brain drain, right. Back to Amazon, though, the brain drain, yes, I see brain drain happening within the confines of the United States, going to the big cities. And this is the case for some time with the after post-industrial revolution and into this .com revolution, digital revolution that we're in. But I do think that Amazon should have paid attention to some of the mid-market cities, Denver, Dallas, Phoenix. I mean, they started in Seattle. That was hardly New York City. How about Minneapolis? How about Cheyenne, Wyoming, maybe? There's a lot of land out in Cheyenne, Wyoming for a lot of warehouses and so forth. But of course, they didn't, keeping the money rolling in. And I guess he's going to need it, Susan, with this divorce.
Poor Jeff.
I am very interested, though, in this topic going forward. Maybe we'll have to address it again with a big brain drain, because when you study history, and no, history doesn't repeat itself exactly, but there's trends in history. We saw it in Europe. We see it in Venezuela. We see it presently in Turkey. People will move, particularly the intellectuals, if they can continue to blossom in their innovations, in their education. They want to be around power areas where they're empowered mentally. And so many universities on the East Coast, so many good universities on the West Coast. That's not to say there aren't universities in the heartland, but there's many more on the East and West Coast. That's all the time we have for this. We're down to about 30 seconds, Susan, in this segment. I'll give you the last thought.
Well, what I was thinking is that the brain drain, I think I have concerns about it in just terms of our own people in America not being able to take jobs that a lot of foreign workers are taking simply because corporations can pay them less.
Straight ahead, let's talk about stranger danger, if it's effective. It's being taught in public schools, but does it work? We'll get into that straight ahead. You're listening to Think America. Find us on podcast form. All of our archive shows are podcasted by going to thinkamericaradio.com and hit the red rectangular button, and you can subscribe to our podcast. I'm Terry. Be right back. We're back on Think America, switching topics now. Stranger danger. We've heard a lot of it. Kids even say it now. It sort of comes trippingly off their tongue, especially if they're, pre-middle school and they see some kind of dangerous situation or they're frightened somehow. Oh, stranger danger. It is taught in public schools. It's taught to protect kids from being abducted by strangers. But I question, Susan, whether or not the lessons actually work. And this is debatable, whether the stranger danger messaging is effective. Why? Children, yes, they're supposed to describe that they're fearful. You're a stranger, danger, danger, they'll yell out. Even when an adult, especially a male adult, smiles at them from a distance, and then the parents, if the parents are nearby, they're immediately distrustful. Even if somebody wants to give a child a compliment within earshot of parents, stranger danger. Is it crazy behavior, or is it an outcome of this educational system that means well, but it's not effective? What do you think?
Oh, I think it's the latter. It's to me, it's kind of a joke, because almost any 5, 6, 7-year-old, if a person comes up to them and says to them in a park, "Hey, would you help me find my puppy?" they go with them. And no amount of stranger danger keeps them from being lured into that trap. And I think what it does more than anything is basically teaching our kids not to trust men. I had an example for you. Not too long ago, my husband was taking care of our youngest grandchild. She was out of school in her hometown, but and so we took her for the week, and they were at a McDonald's, and a lady started questioning my husband about who she was, how old was she, where was her mother, where did she go to school, to the point that he actually had to call our daughter to talk to this woman. And that was ridiculous.
He had to call his daughter, your daughter, collective, you plural, to talk to a stranger to keep her at bay because she was concerned about his role in life as the grandfather, but she distrusted that role.
She distrusted the role. She distrusted him because he was a man. And it was a conversation between our granddaughter and her mother and this woman that kind of calmed everything down. But I guess my point is, we're just teaching them anxiety and fear. They just don't have the faculties to really integrate any kind of situation in which someone can be manipulative. And it's easy to get as a friendly, nice person looking for a puppy, it's easy to get a child away from their parents. So the answer really is that parents really need to be around if they're that concerned about stranger danger, and to keep our men from being vilified as being some kind of moral attackers of children.
In the case of your husband, why didn't he just go tell this stranger woman at a McDonald's to go pound sand? Get out of his face.
I think I think he wished he had done that earlier, but in the beginning, it was such a shock, and he wanted to genuinely address this woman's fear. And then over time, her complete insistence on knowing who she was, where he was from, talking to the granddaughter, I think he did become kind of insulted and angry. But at that point, it was too late. He certainly didn't want the cops called on him. So it was an awkward situation, but I think it's a result of the training that kids get in school, and our parents being so worried about a child being abducted. But I think there's other ways of going about it, certainly without making men look like predators.
I agree with that. Men do look like predators. I know my own father, he's deceased now, but with his grandkids, I don't have grandkids, but at the time my older sister was having kids, he said, "I will not babysit unless there is another adult, or at least a young adult there with me." Just because if anything was to be questioned, if anything, this is the world that we live in now, anything were to be questioned, then the men are more vilified. Statistically, kids feel safer with women than with men. Men go off to work, so they know women better. Mommies are more trusted, in other words. And he says the other reason, this is my own dad now, he said the other reason is that when cops come in, they typically, in their investigation, Susan, look for a culprit within the family. It's the weird Uncle Charlie, or it's the dad, or it's the granddad, or it's that elderly brother that's still single and shows up at the house and he lurks around. So they've got those strikes against them already in the blueprint of these situations.
Well, mothers are working as much as fathers now. And I think the reason they're not, that they don't appear as predators, is we don't demonize them in our education system, in the media, with the feminist movement. Unfortunately, a 6 or 7 year or 8-year-old girl is taught that young to not trust men. Imagine the implications for the rest of her life. for having been taught at such an early age that men are potential predators.
You make a great point, but in terms of abductions, men abduct way more than women. Statistics do show that. But your point is very well taken. We need to leave it there. A really good conversation on stranger danger. And then it begs this question, of course, going forward, whether or not it will continue to be taught in public schools. That's to be determined. Straight ahead on the program, we'll switch gears and talk about whether or not the military will in fact build and pay for the wall, with the director of the Center of Immigration Studies with us out from Washington, D.C. Stick around. Think America. We're back on Think America with Terry Gilbert. I'm delighted to bring to the microphone now the director of the Center for Immigration Studies, the big think tank in all things immigration. I go to this center in Washington, D.C. to help sort out some of these issues that surround the complex topic of immigration. Mark Krikorian is the director. He joins us now. Mark, so nice to have you on the program.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
All right, Mark, I'm trying to get a handle on what I read, and I'm sure our audience is a little in the dark, a little in that gray area as to what the president can and can't do with regard to declaring a national emergency under the National Emergencies Act. Now, it's my understanding he can declare all he wants to, but when it comes down to funding, that still is in the purview of Congress. Now, here's my first question to you. I don't think he's going to do that. I wondered what you thought with regard to getting the wall. But if he does do that, then he's got to find a funding through the military, because he would, in essence, bypass Congress, since Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer have thrown in the towel on his argument and said, we're not even going to discuss it. Do I have that right?
Well, as I understand it, yes, but the funding is already there. What he would have access to is funding that Congress already appropriated for the Defense Department, but hasn't been earmarked for specific use. In other words, he would be able to use money that's already been voted on for the Defense Department, but, you put it for different uses. That's kind of what it amounts to, because otherwise he would just be, that's what the issue is now, is whether Congress is giving him money for the construction of the wall that he wants. And the whole point of this emergency declaration thing is to try to get around that. I agree with you. I don't think he's going to do it. I think he's doing it kind of just to troll the Democrats, kind of yank their chain. And I'm actually kind of concerned. I think it would be a bad precedent because, look, there's going to be a Democrat president at some point. Kamala Harris could win in 2020 or 2024. If once this precedent is there, what stops her from saying there's a climate emergency and using billions from the Defense Department to take over every power plant in the United States, federalize it? I mean, I could see that happening. She probably would fail. It would be challenged in court and all the rest of it. But I think it's a bad road to start going down.
I agree. And I think President Trump is throwing this out there to, as you say, yank their chain or play political jujitsu with them just to say he can, to exert the power, and his base goes rah, rah, and so on and so forth. And I also think he's looking at money already appropriated, because with new money, Pelosi and Schumer are just putting their foot down. So I don't think he's going to do that. But in the meantime, the government is at a shutdown. How long will it last, in your view?
Well, I don't know. It's a good question. One of the things that would argue for potentially a longer shutdown is that the whole government isn't shut down. It's just about 25% of it. So, because Congress already approved the budgets for the Defense Department and various other departments, it's only it's about, like I said, about 25% of the government. But it is sections that do important things, like the TSA and various other things. So at some point, see, the people who are considered what they call essential personnel have to work anyway, and they'll all get paid, but they'll get paid once the shutdown ends. So they'll get a big lump sum check. But at some point, if it drags on, you're going to have some of these people especially in lower level but essential jobs, people like TSA people who are just going to start quitting, and they're just going to leave and just get another job, and they can't be replaced because the agency's shut down. And so it can't continue for too long without starting to cause real problems. You know, people say, well, look, this will help shrink the size of government. It's like, well, it will, I guess, but there are some things the government does need to do. How are we going to get on airplanes if, you know, there's only one TSA inspector at, a big airport? It's just, at some point it's going to end. It's anybody's guess who's going to blink first, though, because what it really amounts to is a game of chicken.
Let me move on to your bailiwick more. I read more and more and more from the Democrat literature and those on the left. This is not a crisis. So when I look back over time, I remember President George W. Bush, 9/11 was National Emergencies Act, had no problem getting that through Congress. Then President Obama, if I recall right, in 2009, swine flu pandemic, National Emergencies Act. Hurricane Katrina, National Emergencies Act. And now President Trump is saying there's a crisis on the border. And lo and behold, the national media, including the recent article I read by Zakaria of CNN and some of the talking heads on CNN and MSNBC and even in the New York Times, there's no crisis. This is a manufactured thing that Trump is doing. Well, Mark, you're the director of the Center for Immigration Studies. At least for 30 years, at least I, just one citizen, have been hearing about the crisis in illegal immigration, not just in the border, but with visas and so on and so on. Do we have a crisis or don't we?
We do. We've had, like you said, we've had a crisis of illegal immigration for a long time. The specific crisis, in other words, the aspect of it that's new is something the president did refer to, and it's been in the news now, is people coming from Central America and then turning themselves in, especially women and kids. And you're using loopholes in our law to come across the border, literally flag down the Border Patrol. They're not trying to hide because they know that if they say the magic words that they've been coached to say, that they'll simply be let go into the U.S. Years in the future. Maybe they'll have a hearing date. If they don't show up, unlikely anybody's going to go look for them. So we're seeing our asylum laws used as a strategy for illegal immigration. And that is definitely new. The majority of border arrests now are Central Americans on the Mexican border. There's still Mexicans coming over, but not nearly as many. It's now mainly Central Americans gaming our asylum system in order to get past the Border Patrol, and basically then they're home free. That is new. Then
that begs this question.
Very dangerous.
Should the president, in his political wisdom, because he's pretty good with politics, we all see that, change the narrative to say it's the amnesty crisis that I'm talking about, and there's no end in sight. In fact, this past week, another Honduran caravan is headed north. And would he win political points that way, not just with the American people, but with Congress? Because if the crisis is one of amnesty and we have this flood at the border, it seems to me that's the better, more specific political play.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's definitely the way to go because you've got to explain what's different and what requires a critical response now. Now, he has talked about that aspect of it, but he also, ends up throwing in stuff about criminals and drugs, which are not untrue at all, but those are things that have been going on for a long time. The specific thing that requires an immediate response is this asylum crisis where people are gaming our system. They've been coached to lie as a way of basically getting into the country scot-free.
And it strikes me that if he did that with the hordes at the border, he would have no problem using the military to protect our southern border in particular, because that's their function, defend the United States, right? We're down to a minute. I'll give you the last thought and word on this.
The president has done a reasonably good job, I think, up to now in making the case. The problem is the Democrats are obsessed with stopping him and preventing him from getting a win. They will prevent him from doing this at any cost. And I think the president needs to sort of make that clear. The Democrats are obsessed with stopping me, even if it harms the nation's security. Who are you going to believe? Who do you side with? These guys who are almost crazed and deranged to stop me for political reasons, or my reasoned argument about how we need to improve border security.
I wish him all the best. We need to leave it there. Mark Krikorian, you can find him at Center for Immigration Studies online. He is the director. We so appreciate your time. Thanks, Mark. Awesome. Genetic testing. I know it is a big industry now, particularly with the advent of 23andMe. 23andMe kind of has moved the needle forward because 23andMe also talks to people in the results about their predispositions for disease. Some of the other testing, DNA testing and so forth, don't go there. They just say, well, this is your ancestry. You know, you're part Scottish, you're part Irish, you're part Norwegian, whatever it is. But in the 23andMe, you can also find out what your predispositions are. About 5 million people alone have spit into test tubes, and then they send their genetic data just to get one genetic testing company, this 23andMe, get the data back in order to get insight into their ancestry, and for some, their ancestry and their health and what the predispositions may be as they age. Now they have entered a 4-year collaboration, this 23andMe, with Big Pharma, GlaxoSmithKline, for an infusion of $300 million. GlaxoSmithKline wants to analyze the genetic data from 5 million people in order to find new drugs and better to select patients for their clinical studies. Now, here's the question. First question, Susan. Do you think that something as loosely regulated as 23andMe should then have the opportunity and the vehicle to take all that data from 5 million people and give it to a farm company, a big pharma company? And what would be the ramifications from the farm company? Now, they say, before I have you answer, they say, oh, we've asked for permission. So you throw privacy out the window. But 23andMe is very loosely regulated. It's always the fine print, and most people don't realize that their privacy is out the window.
I think it is fine. And I don't think we put enough emphasis on an individual's responsibility to sign a contract, right? My DNA data could be shared with third parties. So I decided not to. But there's another side to the coin for people who do and have made that decision. Now it gives third parties, such as this new big pharma company, to do research on millions of people who have already had their DNA tested, and it would save them millions, if not billions, because right now, Terry, it takes $2 billion to get a drug to market. And those costs are turned over to the consumer, you and me. So if you can lessen that cost, hopefully you'll lessen the cost at the consumer level.
Well, of course. What bothers me about this, and you are industrious. Most people aren't. Most people are lazy. You say, I'm going to read the fine print. I'm going to take individual responsibility. I choose no. I don't want my privacy shared with third parties. Most people go, oh, as a matter of fact, I've got relatives on this. And for Christmas, they got a 23andMe. And they go, oh, I'm part Scottish and I'm part Black and I'm part Indian, Native American Indian, and I'm part this. And they want to tell everybody this is who I am. And I kind of go, well, that's not the best Christmas present for me. I kind of already know who I am. But then they're shy about, whoops, am I going to have heart disease? Whoops, am I going to get breast cancer? But once that's out, It's out. There's no unringing that bell. You can't unlearn the results. Then they get all hot and bothered because everybody's going to die of something, whether it's heart disease or the big C or an accident, get hit by a bus. Most of the time, if you've lived long enough, it's going to be the heart disease or it's going to be the big C. And they don't want to know that. And then they start shouting privacy, privacy, privacy. And when you have a company that is not bound by HIPAA, when you have a company that is loosely regulated, when you have a company that is now moving in this direction of learning other things in general, rather than just simply saying, we will make money, 23andMe will tell you your ancestry, DNA, and it will tell you predispositions, and that's enough. Now they're venturing into this whole other world to make money. And I see that's where, that's the area, that's the hurdle I don't like. I think they should be more upfront about it, have to go with HIPAA laws and so forth, but they're direct to the consumer. So right now they don't have to. That's the stumbling block I don't like.
If you had a particular form of cancer that GlaxoSmithKline was studying, and they were able to identify a solution or a drug for it based on researching millions of people's genetic data from 23andMe, you would be jumping up and down to take the medicine, especially if the cost was less, or to take the treatment. Again, I go back to, I think it's the individual's responsibility when they enter into any kind of contract. Every single platform out there, Facebook, any of them, we know that our data is being sold to third parties, because how else are they making their money? I'm concerned about selling it to the government.
Megan Porth will join us on selling to the government angle when we return on the program. Stick around. Welcome back to Think America. Megan Porth joins us at this time on every edition of Think America. She's a contributor and sponsor to Think America. She's an attorney, libertarian, and a mom. You can find her online contract law firm at yourcontractshop.com. Give her a ring there. Megan, we've been talking about genetic testing being a big industry, certainly with the advent of 23andMe. What bothers me about 23andMe is that it's loosely regulated. Privacy is lost forever. Once you sign off, and true, there's personal responsibility to look at the fine print. Absolutely. The results can go for good information or bad information that you don't want to hear. It's not bound by HIPAA. It's direct to consumers. And they argue that 23andMe can take 5 million people with the people that have already part of their pool that have been tested and now go into this new development with the company and look at data and sell it to big pharma companies for an infusion in the case of GlaxoSmithKline of $300 million, so that the pharma company that can then analyze that genetic data from those 5 million people. In other words, they, like a Facebook, would be an aggregate for big pharma. It's not regulated. What say you on this?
As a contracts attorney and as a libertarian, of course, as long as we are presented with a contract and we have the option to review the contract in its entirety, and that these actions are within the terms and conditions and the privacy policies of 23andMe, which they are, these are legal and valid, these actions. Anyone can opt in. And this is my absolute favorite thing about the free market, Terry, is that you actually know this time. You can say, okay, this is what I want to have happen with my data. If I don't want to do this thing, if I don't want to supply them with my DNA, then I do not have to. The government is not putting its boot on your neck, telling you that you have to submit. I don't mind them selling this information to private companies because that is what is listed in the terms and conditions. However, where I do start getting a little paranoid and where I do start puckering up a little bit is if they start selling this information to the government. That is where I start getting really uncomfortable, because at any point in time, the government could be overthrown and taken over by individuals who then could start using that DNA information in a very nefarious way. And that is the way that is the one thing I am concerned about in this situation. I'm not so much concerned about GlaxoSmith obtaining this information and trying to use it to take over the country. But I do worry about that with the government in particular. But when it comes down to us having accountability here, Terry, what we have to remember is that we are engaging in contracts every day, all day long. Everyone who has a cell phone, everyone who has utilities, everyone who purchases something off of the internet or even buys a bagel from their local baker, you are engaging in a form of contract. And what I want our listeners to do, rather than relying upon regulations to protect them in these instances where there's a concern about privacy, where they go out as the market and demand more restrictions. So maybe 23andMe could offer tiered approaches, Terry, where they say, we're going to go ahead and obtain your genetic information, but you get to opt in and out of very specific privacy requirements, which a lot of companies do, especially tech-based companies. And if they plan on complying with the GDPR in the EU, they're going to have to do this anyway. So what I would like to see that long before I would see a government regulation come out.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the risk is, as Susan aptly put, one of our talkers today, it's the government owning the product, owning all of that, because they're going to regulate big pharma anyway. So you both made that astute point. And my point is having to do with how practical is it for your average American to look at all the fine print? Not very. Go ahead and take us out with Change Your Life Technology, this segment.
A report out of the Health Effects Institute released in 2018 actually said that more than 95% of the world's population breathes unsafe air, which is really disturbing. So, of course, the free market responds. And 3M, which is a roofing company, has actually come out with a smog and pollution fighting material that they can put on your roof. It's basically utilizes UV rays and it utilizes the sun to attract those particles to the tiles, and then they restructure it into a breathable material, which then can be rained off later, and it actually does more work than 100,000 trees. So how great that 3M has come out with something that helps fight smog just by using your roof.
Thank you for that. We're always big free market advocates here on the program. Megan, thank you for joining us. And thank you to Susan. Nice having you on the program today.
Thanks, Terry. I enjoyed it.
And to all our listeners and all the folks that contact us at Think America, you can find us at thinkamericaradio.com. Subscribe to our podcast. You can find me at Terry Talk Radio on Facebook. Till next time, think America, reason first, and then converse. The duties we ask of today's teenagers, a far cry from the duties we asked of them during World War II. We'll talk about this on the program today. What about the censoring of conservatives on social media? We saw that with the IRS. It hasn't changed. It's now broadened to social media. We'll have an interview. Would you say that the United States is now in the throes of something that is now being deemed cultural Marxism? Hello there, I'm Terry here on Think America. I'm Terry Gilbert, your host. This is where we reason first and then converse. This is America's radio town hall. I invite real Americans to the program to engage in thought-provoking conversation starters with me on many, many items that you won't see in the headlines, but is really thought-provoking, that gets the juices going in the brain and also trippingly on the tongue. This week, we have Susan. She joins us from the West Coast. She's an executive in the hotel and casino gaming industry. Hello, Susan. And also Megan will be with us later on in the program, Megan Porth. Susan, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Terry. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good. Let's get right started on this. I wanted to bring in your thoughts with my thoughts on this world of electronic and digital with regard to politics. and just what is the new normal. Now, I'm going to tee it up by saying this. We've all seen, not just we in the United States, but the world has seen what President Trump did with rallies. He decided to go out, advertise himself. Here he comes into major markets and then even rural towns, and the lines were around the block. And funny enough, they continue to be around the block 2 years now into his presidency. Recently, since we're into 2019 and the Democrats are gearing up to beat him for 2020, we see Elizabeth Warren using a tactic that I think is a little more edgy. She now decides to do video because she has an exploratory committee, as you know, Susan. She's decided to do some videos about her relating to people. Trump does these massive rallies in person. She's now tapping into the internet to relate to people by way of popping a few beers. Then we have something even newer and more different, and that is a Beto dental cleaning. Last week, Beto O'Rourke, who lost the Texas senatorial race to Ted Cruz, chose to give his commentary to fans and followers while getting his teeth cleaned in a dentist chair. Okay, imagine if you were to start your cell phone while your dental hygienist is taking the plaque off your teeth. Is this the new normal for politics, Susan?
Well, I'll tell you, Terry, I don't want to see a video of my own teeth cleaning, much less someone else's. I'm looking at a screenshot of him now. At least he looks like he has fairly clean teeth. It's an effort to be authentic, and I know that. And it's hard to be authentic when you're in a situation where you're being on camera all the time. I think President Trump made a terrific, authentic presentation when he is out on the tour and talking to people. What you see is what you get. But with pranks like this, being on Instagram when your teeth are being cleaned, it looks phony to me. It's anything but authentic. It looks contrived and manipulated.
That's right, because he's going perhaps through a screen. It's this using the computer to reach. And yes, it's a videotape and you can see him, but not in 3-dimension real life the way Trump does it. And yet you say it's, contrived and so forth. I tend to agree with that. It looks phony. It looks like they're trying to be edgy rather than really being edgy. I mean, the frump of the Trump, he walks into these major markets. The lines are around the block. People wait for him for hours and hours, even when during the campaign trail in 2018 in the fall, when he was introducing candidates for the Republican Party, people would wait for hours until he got there. And this is rural, this is big cities, whatever, because it's the real McCoy that's showing up in that American's town. With this, it's going.
Yeah, I think the problem is, how do you stand out in a crowded campaign field? And that's what they're trying to do. Mm-hmm. Greg Gutfeld on his show on Fox News did a funny stint on politicians being trained to be authentic. And they actually had teachers teaching them how to be authentic. Well, of course, they came off as the biggest phonies known to mankind. Elizabeth Warren saying, "Get me a beer," is inaccurate as I could possibly imagine her being. I could see her drinking a glass of Chardonnay, and I think she should have done that instead. At least it would have been true to her own persona.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that they say, though, about going through social media is that they say their fans and followers really like that, and they get hits. They get the likes, they get the hits. And in this case with Beto, he did it on Instagram. But I'm with you, Susan. I think the hits or the likes are phony as well. If somebody doesn't take the time to say, "You look ridiculous with drool coming out of your mouth," if somebody doesn't stop and type that in, you don't really know what's behind the like. What he was aiming to do, for the sake of our audience, is he was aiming to illustrate that he's there with his dental hygienist who grew up on the border in El Paso, Texas, and that she is the daughter of an immigrant mother, and that he is relatable to those folks that, of course, want to be on the left, maybe of Hispanic origin. And by extension, he's hoping that that's relatable in the issues of immigration, particularly with asylum seekers that are coming to be in the United States. And of course, as Republicans always say, that's just more voters for the Dems.
Well, he's an example of an extremely online candidate. And I'm sure besides him listening to him while he's going through a drive-through or getting gas or skateboarding onto a stage, I'm sure we're going to see a lot more of this kind of behavior and this kind of authenticity as a candidate in the future.
Yeah, and I think I hear authenticity as being a little sarcastic in your voice, and I would be sarcastic with it too. This is a far cry from going to barbecues and kissing babies and petting dogs and signing autographs and grabbing, the soapbox to stand up at an afternoon gathering out in the middle of Middle America and to talk to people, talk to your constituents. Somebody made the reference, what is he going to do next, a colonoscopy? And that jumped out, and I just really remembered that in my head, and I thought, who knows? Who knows? The standard is now so low, don't you think, Susan, that sort of anything goes now, especially if you do it on the internet that isn't censored, of course.
Right. Do you know, Elizabeth Warren could be teaching her youngest grandchild how to potty train while she's on Instagram. Who knows what's next?
Yeah, there you go. And for the left, it sort of doesn't faze them, right? I always get the feeling like, oh, well, shrug shoulders. So what? This doesn't matter. This is the way to get hits or clickbait. This is the whole idea now. You know, everybody, the internet is this giant beast, and you can't feed it enough because it just keeps going and keep going and keep going. And you got to be relevant every single day. And certainly we see that with Trump. He's out there tweeting 3-4 times a day sometimes. So I think in following that pattern, we may see a new norm. I hope not, because the standard is so very low and it doesn't last, right? So people might say, well, if she's teaching a granddaughter how to potty train, that'll be a one-day story. But if she doesn't get the hits, the fear, Susan, is she'll do it again because it's feeding the beast, right?
Exactly, feeding the beasts, and we never, ever log off. So they're faced with the challenge to be in front of us several times every single day.
Do you think some of the Republicans will stick with this idea of rallies, or is that indigenous to Trump?
No, I think they'll test out a lot of different options in terms of getting their face and their voice in front of the potential voter. And why wouldn't they?
Yeah, why wouldn't they? I just wonder what the new norm is going to be. I would go this far in my predictions that the new norm is this kind of thing with a beer on video or dental cleaning. And to your point, you're 100% right. They've got to stand out. I read a report last week, 36 Democrats, potential Democrats, and there's new ones coming in every day. That's a huge field. It's double what the Republicans were doing. So how in the world are you going to stand out? So in terms of creativity, I give Beto a gold star for creativity. You know, he's got the drool coming down his cheek. The hygienist is this attractive Hispanic woman that he goes to. The plaque is coming off his teeth, and never miss the moment because he's on the campaign trail, right? He's doing it for the constituent. He's doing it for the voter. He never rests. So I think this is the new normal for the Democrats. I'm not sure Republicans will go that way. Which is more effective, do you think, Susan?
Oh, it probably depends on your demographic and what generation you are. I do have to give them credit for assuming a position that is so laughable, talking while you're trying to get your teeth cleaned. It got my attention, and that's all that he wanted.
Do you think this was an afterthought? He goes to the hygiene chair, and then he gets a rapport with her, and she says, yeah, I grew up in Texas and in El Paso, and et cetera, et cetera. And then he goes, whoa, this is an Instagram moment. This is an opportunity that I don't want to miss.
You know, Terry, not at that high level of politics. I think every single movement is scripted. They can't afford to make too many mistakes.
Okay, so chances are he isn't necessarily in El Paso. It was a place to go, get the teeth cleaning there, set up, because, in the olden days, prior to the internet and all the fast phones that we have and the smartphones that we have, it would be lights, camera, action. We're going to take lighting in here. The dental office agrees that you can come in with cable people, video cameras and everything, and you would see a politician relating to the everyman that is a dentist, a small business owner, and he's got a dental operation. Okay, not this. This is more off the cuff, but I tend to think like you do. It was planned to be off the cuff.
Oh, absolutely. And there's probably another 100 scripts that are just waiting in line to be fulfilled.
I hope it's not
Instagram.
And I hope it's not a colonoscopy. Oh, right out loud. Bodily invasions. Jeez, we have to see that. But yeah, anything to stand out. And indeed, here we're talking about it on a national radio show because he did stand out. I just can't get over him showing us his mouth and the plaque coming off his teeth. I just can't get over it. But it was the wow factor, and it did work. Final thought.
Yeah, we spent 10 minutes talking about him. So definitely he got a lot of what he wanted, at least from us.
Well, let's not talk about him anymore and move on. I appreciate your input as we kick off this edition of Think America. Thank you, Susan. Good, robust discussion to get us going when we come back. Today's teenage duties, how they are very different than the teenagers of, say, World War II. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the program. This is Think America, where we reason first and then converse, America's radio town hall. Susan joins us from the West Coast. I want to ask you this. The duties we ask of today's teens are really a far cry from the duties asked of the teens of, say, the World War II period. Today's teens, they're not filling jobs as electricians or sheet metal workers or draftsmen, which was required of teens during those war years. But here's my point, Susan. If they had to do these things, they could step up, learn, and do it just like teens of the past. And I contend that maybe it's because we're not giving them tasks that are as significant and which build work ethic out of them because we don't have to. We're not in wartime. Do you agree with that?
I absolutely agree. And I think it, particularly for our guys out there, I think we feminize them and they have a chance, both men, boys and girls, teenagers, if you want to call them boys and girls, have a chance to do so much more. For example, my mom was 17 and she was a Rosie the Riveter, contributing as an aluminum welder in the war effort. So other young men were underage veterans, or they, like you said, they were electricians or draftsmen. I don't think we give them a chance to show what kind of human potential they have. And in case of our guys, I think we really minimize their chance to be successful, masculine, young men capable of hard and complex jobs.
And part of that, though, is that you have to judge this within the culture and the context, the time frame, history as we have it. And what we have today is a digital world. We don't have an agrarian world. We don't have an industrial world. And we're not in the world of a draft or all-out full-time war where everybody had to be part of the war effort. So how to get them so that they're challenged when they're looking at cell phone? I mean, it's not the kid's fault. I think we would both agree to that. But how to change this so that they're challenged and learn complex skills, have to think outside of the box in fixing things, etc. I'm not sure that our world allows for that based on the world that we have today. We're a little too soft.
Yeah, but Terry, I think the way, from what I've seen, and I've had children now that have gone through high school, what I see with our education system is that teenagers are treated as if they cannot be educated to do great things at a young age. And that's simply not true, as evidenced by what teenagers did in World War II or in the Korean War, even in the Afghanistan War and our war on terror. If they go through the military at a young age, 18, say, we see what kind of potential they have. They're flying jet planes. They're fighter pilots. They're working on jet planes. They're maintenance engineers. They are in surveillance and intelligence. They certainly are capable of more of just sweeping the floor or doing the dishes in the kitchen.
I agree with that. The problem is how to get into a mindset, a culture, an environment where they are challenged. And here's one of my bigger fears looking out on the horizon. Every time I turn around and see some article on artificial intelligence or hear some talking head talk about artificial intelligence, and most that are talking about it are pretty plugged in as futurists, or they're working in artificial intelligence and they're seeing down the pike what our future is going to hold in as short as 10 or maybe 20 years. We're looking at, and I heard this statistic, it made my jaw drop, Susan, we're looking at about 40% within 20 years of the human workforce not working as a result of robots doing those tasks. So in some respects, educating kids to be a draftsman or a mechanic, I'm sure there's folks that say, well, what the heck? Why do it? A robot will be doing it instead anyway.
Well, there has to be an oracle for the robot. So if you're going to prepare for AI, why aren't we teaching kids how to work on the robots? I mean, there's a tremendous amount of, somehow we're going to have to maintain them. We're going to have to teach them these robots, and you need an oracle to do that. So a multitude of jobs are going to be created through AI, just as they were created with the printing industry, just like they were created with the Industrial Revolution. There has to be jobs to upkeep or keep up with whatever we are producing.
I tend to agree with you. In fact, when I hear these statistics, 35%, 40% of Homo sapiens will not be relating to each other. Humans will not be relating to each other, will relate to a robot, or robots will be relating to each other. That makes my jaw drop. I tend to agree with you. I tend to think, neither of us are soothsayers and we're not futurists and we don't have the crystal ball and nobody can be certain. But in 10 years, all those jobs wiped out? I tend to think not. But I also tend to think this will be a major sea change, a major shift, unlike shifts we have seen with the Industrial Revolution or wartime, etc. I'm with you. Kids need to learn about how to maintain a robot when in the past they've learned how to be a metal worker. We need to leave it there. Good conversation. Thanks very much. Interview straight ahead on Think America. I'm Terry. Stick around. We're back on Think America, where we reason first and then converse. Let's switch gears now and bring in my interview for this hour. Rachel Alexander is with us. She's an attorney and a columnist for the ever so popular website, The Stream. She writes often on how social media gets away with censoring conservatives. And I want to talk to her today about how Congress is working to stop that. I don't see much success at that score. But Rachel, welcome to the program. How do you see it? Is Congress working to stop the slam and the censoring of conservatives on social media? Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. Congress is working slowly but surely. I will say this. We've seen these hearings it's had with the CEO of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg. We've seen Google employees testify. It's happening, but not fast enough to make a huge difference. I think, most of what Congress is trying to do right now is trying to scare the big media companies into making the changes on their own. And so some of that is having an effect as we're seeing these social media companies back down on these, vicious bans that they've been doing lately. I think it's happening. It's just happening rather slow.
Yeah, I think the public, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you're probably coming at it from a different prism. But as a generalist that I am and studying topical news, I think the public got very tuned in to this censoring of conservatives during the IRS scandal, Rachel, when Lois Lerner was guilty, even though she's never been charged and she skated, but she's guilty of this even within the IRS. And we all know that story. I don't think the public has been plugged into this prior. Do I have that right?
Yeah, the IRS scandal was swept under the rug. So people aren't as aware as they should be. So now when, comes along and social media is doing the same thing, people are shocked and they don't know what to think. They don't know what to do about it. And, they certainly don't think necessarily that Congress is the right place to handle it, because Congress didn't do anything with Lerner other than interrogate her.
Oh, that's right. And so as a pillar of society, the United States Congress, would they do anything about a Mark Zuckerberg? He sits on the hot seat, sweat rolls down, he asks for water, he's parched in the throat, et cetera, et cetera. So he clearly is stressed. But the bottom line at the top of the page, as I see it, Rachel, is that nothing comes of it. And partly because Congress is maybe too uninformed about what to do about it. They're not plugged in the way IT people would be plugged in and social media giants are plugged in. They don't know what to do. And then to couple that with the fact that they don't have backbone to do it.
Yeah, I think a lot of these people in Congress, they don't run their own Facebook and Twitter accounts. Their staff does. So they don't quite, fathom what's going on. And then you've got compounding the problem is the fact that the speech that takes place on these platforms is not technically free speech because they're not public forums. These are private companies. So trying to regulate them, you're going to have to come in with things like antitrust laws, discrimination laws. It's not as clear cut as you think it is, because they don't get handled the way speech in the town square would have free speech protections.
Yes. And not to mention, there's so many on the internet that act like journalists, and yet there's nobody or no organization watching the henhouse of all these journalists, right? To be a journalist in America, one doesn't need a license the way a real estate broker needs a license, or a doctor needs a license, or an attorney needs to be good with the bar to practice, right? You're an attorney. You certainly understand that. So there's all these journalists out there, and this platform of Facebook or other platforms as well, they don't have any standard from which to be regulated. Do you think that Facebook will then be regulated in the future more like a broadcast company, ABC, NBC, CNN, Fox, etc.? Or will it be just freewheeling because, God forbid, nobody wants to censor the internet, she said sarcastically.
Yeah. I don't really see them regulating Facebook, because look what happened to MySpace and some of these other companies, like Microsoft. They sort of went by the wayside, and they're not as popular as they used to be. I think you're going to have newer, edgier companies, whether it's, Snapchat or Instagram, which I think is owned by Google. But you're going to have all these other programs popping up to compete with Facebook. And I already see conservatives deserting Facebook in droves for MeWe, and there's another one out there that they're deserting Twitter for as well. Gab.
Well, I know Facebook, the bloom is off the rose. That part I know. And people get disturbed that, let's say they have 4,000 followers, and when they post something, it doesn't go to those 4,000 followers. It may go to 40 followers. But let's leave that as it is for now. Back to this idea of a broadcast medium. We're already into 2019. And here we go with the political thump every day. We got Elizabeth Warren in a exploratory committee. We've got others that are chomping at the bit right now. I read, Rachel, that there are 36 potential Democrat nominees. 36, that's a lot for the presidency. Now, all of this will then become this thump or this drumbeat, so to speak, will be evident on Facebook, for example. We're going to go into this once again. Are we going to, in your prediction, go into another conservatives are censored on Facebook for the 2020 election?
Oh, yeah. I think it's just going to get worse. It's going to get worse before it gets better. They've just leaked Facebook's rules of what it bans and censors, and it's pretty draconian. If you're just talking about excluding a group, let's say you were talking about women and you wanted a women-only group, that could be a basis for banning you from Facebook. It's just going to get worse, and I think people have got to be extra alert because Facebook, when it reacts, it's usually after the fact, after you've been banned for 6 months or a month or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of predictions, let's segue into that. I know you've written quite a bit about predictions for 2019, both from the conservative lens, general, larger political lens, and even international lens. Talk to us a little bit about what you see. It still is just mid-January, so we got many months ahead this year. How do you think this year is going to shape up? And weave that into the fact that we're in a shutdown.
Well, speaking of the presidential upcoming election, I think Hillary Clinton is going to announce that she's running. I think that woman is. Yes, I think she's a complete narcissist. It's all about herself. And, she's still resentful of the fact that she lost the election but won the popular vote, and resentful of the fact that her husband is president and she hasn't been. So I think she's going to say, I got recruited to run and I'm just doing it for the good of the country.
What else?
I predict that Special Counsel Robert Mueller is going to target more associates of Trump, and he's going to indict them for reasons unrelated to Russian collusion. These are going to be things like process crimes, such as lying to the FBI or obstruction of justice.
Well, we've got William Barr this past week that looks like he's a shoo-in now for AG. And he says he's going to toe the line on Robert Mueller without making him cease and desist the investigation altogether.
Yeah, that's not exactly a good sign. Apparently the two are friends, but I think the longer Mueller goes on, the more little people, and I say that, referring to myself, because I was collateral damage myself when they came after Sheriff Arpaio. They're going to go after us little people, and they're going to destroy their lives, put them in prison, whatnot.
Okay, back to Hillary. Who's her running mate, since you predicted she's going to jump in again?
I kind of think she'd pick somebody like Kamala Harris, somebody younger to balance out the age, a minority, someone who can be groomed to be president after her. That would probably be the wisest pick, although they're both pretty darn far left. So, if she was smart, she'd pick someone a little more moderate.
Well, I've got to say, I don't think it's going to be Hillary, and I don't think it's Kamala Harris. We're down to 30 seconds, so I'll give you my prediction, then we'll have you back, and we can talk about who's right. I think it's an Elizabeth Warren or it's a Biden-Beto ticket. That's my prediction anyway. Final thought. You got 15 seconds.
Oh, I think they could easily beat Hillary in the primary. I just think Hillary's going to jump into the primary.
I see. All right, Rachel, very good. You can find her work at The Stream. It's .org, correct? TheStream.org or .com?
Stream.org.
TheStream.org. Rachel Alexander, attorney and columnist at that very popular website. Very good, Rachel. Thanks for coming on. We appreciate you. Welcome back to the program. You can always find us online, thinkamericaradio.com. Subscribe to our podcast, download every single archive show when you go to Think America Radio and hit the red tab on the homepage. Is the United States in the throes of cultural Marxism? There's a new term for you, but I read about some of this, Susan, and there is something to be said that maybe we put our big toe in this pond. The theory says that the driving force behind the socialist revolution is not the proletariat, but the intellectuals here in the United States. While Marxism has largely disappeared from the workers' movement, Marxist theory stands tall, and it flourishes today in cultural institutions. particularly in the academic world. And to that, I would also add in the world of pop culture, as in Hollywood, for example, and the mass media, it's there as well. So the theorists of Marxism recognize that the proletariat, the image of the proletariat and the function of the proletariat, would not play the expected historical role as a revolutionary, but they are there alive and well in the masses. So the revolution to happen in contemporary parlance would be that the movement must depend on the cultural leaders to destroy the existing, which is mainly the Judeo-Christian tradition, for the sake of secularism, for the sake of the masses, for the sake of group think. I think there is something to this, whereas this theory has not diminished, but maybe it's flourishing in America today. What say you?
Well, I think we've done a lot more than just put our toe in the water of cultural Marxism. I think that started in the 60s. And now in 2019, I think we're up to our neck in cultural Marxism. We criticize every single institution, our family, our masculinity versus femininity, sexual identities. There is nothing that is not being questioned and attacked every single day in American society.
Would you say in this theory that it's the attack mainly on the Judeo-Christian tradition? Or would you broaden that and say it's just attack on mores, on tradition in general? For example, we just left the Christmas season. People are starting to come back to saying Merry Christmas. But I will attest that what I witnessed, particularly during the Obama years, 8 years of the Obama years, it was all season's greetings. So I wonder if it's just the attack on the Judeo-Christian tradition, of which is our heritage, of course, or just general, more common American traditions. For example, saying Merry Christmas just to a stranger, let's say at the gas station or in a shopping mall. You don't know if they're Jewish. You don't know if they're Hindu. You don't know. You just say it.
I think it's more than just our Judeo-Christian religion. I think that's attacked every day. But beyond that, it's our social mores, our accepted traditions and customs like Christmas or Easter, our moral attitudes. Any kind of moral attitude we have is questioned as being immoral. Our manners, our ways. And basically, with social mores, legislation does not change until social mores change. And in that case, I think that people who espouse a form of cultural Marxism have been very successful in changing our laws through attacking social mores.
To be sure, that's very, very insightful point to get across to this listening audience, that it's the social cultural shifts and then legislation follows accordingly, not the reverse. And I would attest that we probably are in a kind of cultural Marxism with controlling the groups, the controlling culture, controlling politics, controlling morals, controlling women as a group, blacks as a group, Hispanics as a group, the underdog as a group, et cetera, et cetera. And when you control that, you control the density of the population for the shift of which you're trying to achieve. I think there's a lot of Marxism in that, even though, as I said at the top, the proletariat is not the massive revolutionaries from the masses. It is the intellectuals in our universities, and certainly those that think they are in the artistic world, as in Hollywood, New York. It's the coasts, right? It's the coast, the two coasts,
Yeah.
the West Coast.
It is. And it's an aggressive criticism of all aspects of our life and society. And that's what we're hearing from the progressives today.
Megan Porth will join us and she'll weigh in. Our audience is pretty familiar with her. She is a libertarian and she is an attorney, has a lot to say on topics like this. So we always have her to weigh in. She joins us next here on Think America. Don't go away. Megan Porth joins us. She is a sponsor through her law office and a contributor to the program. She's an attorney, libertarian, and she has an online contract law firm, very popular, called yourcontractshop.com. Find her there after the program. Megan, welcome. And I want to get to this idea of whether or not you think America is in the throes of something now being deemed cultural Marxism, where the proletariat the proletariat figure are the intellectuals and sometimes the elite in the arts and sciences, sometimes out of the West Coast and the East Coast, i.e. Hollywood, or the think tanks that are very, very liberal at universities. And so we don't have a revolutionary per se in the figure of the masses revolting, but we do have the intellectuals that serve as the proletariat moving the masses, demanding social justice for women and for underdogs, perceived underdogs, and blacks and Hispanics and minorities. And you've got controlling of politics and controlling of morals, etc. Are we in cultural Marxism in your view?
Not quite. For cultural Marxism, what we're looking at is we're looking at intellectuals moving our culture, basically working to disrupt it, to allow the position of a, let's say, one large international worldwide government to come in and then take over Western culture. A lot of times when we look at what cultural Marxism is labeled today, we're looking at things like feminism, civil rights, modern art, things like that. I think, of course, if that's how you define it, then we are in the age of cultural Marxism. Obviously, the definition is what defines it. But I don't think that necessarily that what is happening in today's society is because there is this great figurehead or this great conspiracy to try to undermine Western culture. I actually think that it may potentially be the result of capitalism and the free market. When we look at what is being consumed by the consumers, it is some of these things. What is attractive to consumers is feminism. What's attractive to young women, my generation, is feminism. They want to do more than stay at home. A lot of times what's also pointed to are things like undermining Western Christian values. Actually, the truth is that although there are a lot of people in my generation who are for removing that religion from the state, which, by the way, is a founder's idea. That's the founder's idea. A lot of my friends, a lot of millennials are still very Christian, Terry. I don't see that as being something that's actually dying out. It just may not be perpetuated as much in a state-like environment. And that's something that I really am for, actually, because I believe that is what our country was based on, religious freedom. And by pulling out any kind of religious indoctrination in schools, public schools in particular, private schools, they can do whatever they want. But in public schools in particular, where the government is funding it, I'm actually for that. So as far as cultural Marxism is defined, I don't think that we're quite there. This was also, remember that we had cultural Bolshevism that was being perpetuated during the Nazi Germany. This was something that Hitler was worried about. So I just want to be careful when we're looking at cultural Marxism. It seems to be a very neocon argument where I think we're kind of undermining what's actually happening and where the problems actually are in the country.
Well, you make some very astute points. One thing I would add to that, along the definition, although that needs to be hashed out, is this dictatorship of political correctness. That's very troubling, and that's a sign that I see, plus the individual dying for the group. So when you talk about women, for example, they die for the individual dies for the sake of the larger group because she happens to be female. Take it away on Change Your Life Technology. We'll leave cultural Marxism on the back burner for now.
Well, Terry, there are 10 million people worldwide who are afflicted with Parkinson's. And I'm not sure if many of our listeners know, but Michael J. Fox is actually one of them. He has a phenomenal foundation out there. And what they've done recently is they've actually underwritten a new medication therapy that was developed by researchers out of the University of Queensland. A lot of times they were trying to figure out how to address the neurodegenerative disorder by blocking neurotoxic proteins. But what they're finding now is that maybe they can actually trigger the inflammation. So they're using a minute molecule called called MCC 950 given orally once per day. They've seen some miraculous results in mice, and they're looking to do some human testing in 2020.
Thank you very much, Megan, for weighing in. And thank you to Susan for being part of the program and joining us from the West Coast. And to all our listeners and all those that contact the show, we appreciate you as well in every one of our affiliates. I'm Terry Gilbert. Remember, reason first and then converse.